Hello, my friends. Welcome back to another episode of the Basics of Balance. My name is Ariella, and for today's episode, I want to just preface it by saying I am really big, if you can't tell, in explaining the why behind every single thing that I suggest, all of my advice. When I am working with a client, I never want them to just listen to my advice blindly and just like do what I'm asking them to do without paying attention to why I'm asking them to do said action, right? I'm a really big believer in the more that we understand why we are doing something and why what we're doing is important, the more bought in we are going to be. Okay. There's obviously going to come times in our journey where, we go through peaks and valleys, right? We go through boring, mundane times where we feel like nothing is happening and we just have to put one foot in front of the other and be consistent and it's boring and discipline and all of the things, right? And then we go through valleys where maybe we are just really struggling. We are really struggling to logistically show up. Maybe we're in a really stressful season of life and there's not a lot of time to, meal prep and work out and things like that. But then we also go through times where it's just like, man, our workouts are just feeling great and it's so easy to show up and it's fun and we're dialed in. And the more that we understand why we are doing something, the more we understand why it's important, the better we are going to be able to show up to the best of our ability in the times when we don't feel like it, when we're in the valleys or when we're in the mundane and we're just putting one foot in front of the other and we don't get the dopamine hits, like seeing the scale, drop and, just all of those things, right? And so, I thought we would talk today about a few different reasons as to why eating enough protein matters. Ooh, I wish I could see how many eye rolls. No, but real talk. Okay, here's the thing, guys. The importance of protein, getting enough protein in our diet is not going anywhere. Okay. So the standard is the standard, and it might be difficult to rise to the standard and reach the standard. However, like I said, the more that we can understand why something is important, the more reasons we are giving ourselves to gravitate towards and use, right? When we don't feel like it. Okay. So pick and choose from any of these. Feel free to write these down. But let's kind of get into it because eating enough protein is not just an arbitrary do this and you will you know, insert objective here, lose weight, build muscle, get healthier. All of those things can happen if you're eating enough protein, but we have to make sure that we are eating enough protein relative to us, our goals, our body, our background, things that we are working towards. Okay. My protein targets are not your protein target. So, generalized advice like eat 100 grams of protein a day is a good guideline. However, it still misses the mark. That might be too much or too little for some people. Okay. So, all of that to say, reasons why eating enough protein matter or should matter to you. Number one, if you are trying to get stronger, if you are trying to build muscle, okay, we are starting with a very basic fundamental reason. The importance of eating enough protein is literally the difference of you actually reaching that goal or not, okay? You cannot build muscle if you are not eating enough protein. You cannot get stronger if you are not giving your body the basic fundamental building blocks to build muscle and get stronger. Okay. Um, and now you've heard me talk, a little nuance on that of, building muscle, getting stronger, all that magic happens on your rest and your recovery. However, if you are not eating enough protein, that's not going to happen. Like you're not going to get stronger. You're not going to build muscle. And so we can, struggle to eat enough protein. But the importance of that is not going anywhere. Okay. So we still want to try as hard as we can to eat enough protein to get the most out of our strength training sessions, right? Your strength training session is arguably the least important as it relates to building muscle. Yes, you need to make sure that you're following a structured strength training program. Yes, you need to make sure you are lifting with enough intensity, you're lifting heavy enough, your form, your range of motion, all of these things matter. However, without enough protein, you are just simply moving your body, which is great, which is fantastic, right? All movement has value. But if the goal is to build, we are missing the mark if we are not giving our body the basic fundamental building blocks. Okay. I don't make the rules, I just am the messenger. Number two, if you are traveling, okay, really, really big, important, it helps you stay more satisfied instead of filling up on food that doesn't necessarily support your goals. Okay. When we are traveling, it's not that easy to hit our protein targets. And so, sure, we might not hit our protein targets, especially if you're newer to, eating enough protein. But when we remember that one of the benefits of eating enough protein is to help keep us more satisfied, it can, in a indirect way, be a way to control our appetite, to control how many calories we are eating. Okay. And so if you are somebody who is trying to maintain a healthy weight, if you are trying to lose weight, how many calories you eat matters, right? And so, if we are traveling, obviously we're going out to eat, we're trying these restaurants, we're maybe staying at a friend's house and they're making us breakfast or awesome. I love that for you. Live your best life. A balanced lifestyle should include those things as well as boring meals, right? However, part of eating enough, or I'm sorry, part of the benefit of protein is it helps keep us more satisfied. So if you start your day when you're traveling, when you're out of town with a breakfast with at least 30 grams of protein, that might be two individual servings of yogurt, right? 2 cups of yogurt that you can get through Instacart and put in your hotel fridge. That 30 grams of protein is going to help keep you more satisfied throughout the whole day than a breakfast like the continental breakfast downstairs in your hotel, a bagel and cream cheese, or a bowl of cereal, right? And so it can be kind of a strategy. If you're not tracking your food, okay, awesome. But implementing some of these things can still make it a little easier for you to stay in control of how much you're eating. You still have to make the choices, you still have to choose to practice restraint, but it can be easier to practice restraint and make better choices when you're not starving. 24/7 and you feeling like you're a bottomless pit and you want just like pizza and all of the things, right? Have your pizza, but also like make some chicken tenders with it. Wash it down with a protein shake, right? Balance. Number three, if you are over 30 years old, you are losing muscle. It's not that serious like the internet makes it out to be, but muscle is your greatest predictor of how healthy you will age. It doesn't matter if you are a male or female. We are losing about 8% of muscle every decade past 30. Okay. And muscle is responsible for a lot of things, but primarily responsible for making sure that you're going to get off the toilet when you're older. And, hindsight is 2020. We don't want to come up to a situation where we are in our later years of life looking back saying shoulda, coulda, woulda. It's very important that we are being proactive and we are taking steps to invest in our health, right? And to invest in the number one resource that's going to make it possible for us to travel if we want to travel without limitation, without saying, I can't do that because I'm physically unable to do that, right? Your how much protein you eat is going to slow down the rate at which you lose muscle, right? Now don't mishear me, we still need that strength training component, right? And strength training is not wearing a weighted vest, and I'm hitting on that because I know that that's a very popular um um you know way to build muscle that is being communicated, we'll say. But when you are over 30 years old, we really want to make sure that we are investing in our future because obviously time is passing and we are all going to get old. We can't prevent it. It is inevitable. I don't know about you, but I am here to live a full quality of life as long as possible. I don't want to have limitations. And so when I am strength training, that is my primary focus. I am thinking of my future. When I am eating enough protein, it is to make sure that I am investing in my future because I am losing muscle and that's just something that happens. Okay. And again, it's not that serious. You don't have to freak out, but it is one of those things where little tiny choices over a long period of time is going to add up. And so if we are over 30 years old, we have to shift that focus away from the diet mindset, chasing your smallest self, because that's already happening to a large degree, and really shift that focus to chasing our stronger self. Okay. How much can we lift? How much food can we get away with? Right. And that is going to kind of shift that focus to I need to make sure that I'm eating enough protein so that I am giving my body what it needs so I can live a healthy and well balanced lifestyle, independent as long as possible with as few limitations as possible. Next reason is if you're injured. Whether you are dealing with a sports related injury, like you lifted and you tweaked your back or you tweaked your knee or, anything like that, or let's say, you were playing flag football with some kids. When you're injured, protein is the number one resource that is being used and turned over, cellularly speaking, to heal, to recover. Okay. One of the reasons why we need to have enough protein when you are trying to get stronger and build, right? Because that is the number one resource that's being used. Think about that as like mini injuries throughout your entire body. Well, same. When you are injured, you need to make sure that you are eating enough of the basic fundamental building blocks to help your body do that. Protein in and of itself, when we're not eating enough protein, when we are injured, your body is going to take from the largest storage of protein in your body because it needs to do what it needs to do, and that's your muscle. So now think about it like, hey, I'm already over 30, I'm losing muscle, and I'm injured. You definitely need to make sure that you are eating enough protein because if you're not eating enough protein, your body is taking even more from that muscle. Okay. Um, so really important, especially if you are injured and you can't exercise, right? For whatever reason. Maybe the injury that you have is truly like you are bedridden and you cannot move your body. It's even more important that you are eating enough protein, okay? If you cannot stimulate that muscle, then we need to do the best that we can within that situation and make sure that we are eating enough protein to at least replenish what your body is using and trying to take from in order to heal, right? Um, also, another example, my mom, she broke her ankle a few months ago, and we were talking a few weeks ago about how important it was for her to make sure she was eating enough protein. She barely works out. She definitely can't move a whole lot because she broke her ankle, and she's got some other health issues, osteoporosis, things like that, that's making it really hard for her body to heal. And so we were talking about the importance of making sure you're eating enough protein in that regard, right? Like, mom, you really need to make sure, you have autoimmune issues, you're healing a lot slower, you have osteoporosis, so your bones are really struggling to like keep up and heal and, things like that. And so you got to make sure that you're doing at least what you can, which is eating enough protein, right? And so that kind of gives you a little bit more to work with to say like, okay, no, I really need to do this if I really want to get back to like my regular quality of life, right? Next up is if you are in a deficit. Guys, I can't stress this enough. So many reasons as to why protein matters when you are in a deficit. So let's talk about just a couple of reasons as to why. Number one, when you're in a deficit, you're not eating enough food, okay? Kind of what I talked about in point number one, when the goal is to build muscle, when the goal is to get stronger, you have to eat enough protein, right? Well, if you are not eating enough food in general, your body is going to struggle to maintain the muscle mass that you already have. Okay. And so when you're in a deficit, you're not eating enough food intentionally. We're doing that on purpose to lose weight. We're doing that on purpose to lose fat. So it's extremely important to you. You don't have the calories to leverage. You got to make sure you're eating enough protein to preserve the muscle that you have. Okay. Your muscle is your metabolism, for lack of a better analogy, okay? And so we want to keep your metabolism as high as possible when the goal is to lose weight, when the goal is to lose fat. And if you're not eating enough calories, well, that's going to be really hard to do. So we got to make sure we're eating enough protein. And then we couple that with making sure that you are strength training. We are stimulating that muscle, right? We are trying to preserve that muscle as much as possible because that is what's going to help keep your metabolism as high as possible, which is directly going to impact and affect your overall goals and progress, right? Number two, when you are dieting, you are obviously going to go through periods of hunger. Okay. We want that hunger to be manageable. We want it to be controlled to a certain degree, but we can't get around the fact that when you're intentionally not eating enough food, you are going to be hungrier than you would be if you were eating more food, right? Like that makes sense, right? And so, one of the ways, like kind of what we talked about when you're traveling to control your appetite, to control how much you're eating, right? In an indirect way, is to make sure that you are eating enough protein. Protein, fat, and fiber, those are going to directly impact your satisfaction. They're going to directly impact your hunger, your appetite, things like that. So when you are dieting, that protein component is going to secondarily help us overcome that hunger. Okay. And so you're going to still deal with hunger, but you're not going to deal with as much hunger because you are eating enough protein. All right. We can't get around all hunger. It's just part of the process. It's, just something that we have to deal with, which is another reason why we like get in, get to work, and get out. Because hunger is your body's way of saying it's not getting enough. And if it doesn't get enough of what it needs for too long of a period of time, well, then that's when we typically start seeing like a lot of, issues pop up. Maybe you're dealing with maybe more injuries than usual, right? You're getting hurt during your workouts. Maybe you're starting to deal with some digestive issues, some hormonal imbalances. Your body starts, shutting down systems and processes because its only job is to stay alive. So, yes, hunger is part of the process, and that's kind of some good biofeedback that you are in a deficit, but eating enough protein is going to make it possible to stay in that deficit a little bit longer because you're not just like white knuckling it and eating just like lettuce. You know what I mean? You're giving your body some of that nourishment. Um, if you are sick, similar to if you're injured, if you are sick, oh my goodness gracious, it's so important to make sure you're eating enough protein. And don't get me wrong, I get it. Like when you are sick, especially if you're dealing with something like a stomach bug, or a stomach flu, eating is the last thing on your priority list. So, like, again, totally understand context, but of the choices that you are making, obviously, I'm assuming you're making some kind of comforting choices. Let's be honest, you're sick, right? You're a human. You are allowed these things to, eat for comfort if you need to. However, again, eating with intention, protein is the number one resource that's being used when you're injured and or sick. Okay. And so you're still recovering. If you think about when you're sick, your body is still fighting something. It still is needing that recovery. And if protein is the number one resource that's being used, cellular turnover to heal, whether that's from an injury, right? Acute situation, or from an illness, very important to make sure that you're having enough protein. Because again, if your body is not, getting enough protein when it needs it, it's taking from its largest protein storage, which is your muscle. And so, if you think about it, those that are later in life, right? When they are dealing with a lot of illnesses, when they're dealing with a lot of injuries, their body is breaking down. They've lost muscle over so long of time, but their appetite is also not there as well. And so they're at severe risk of even more muscle loss. Not their body is not being supported by, having enough food and nourishment and whatnot. And so, obviously, as you get older, sure, that's part of the process of aging, but we can fight back on some of these age related illnesses, some of these age related injuries by preserving our muscle, by trying to eat enough protein, by strength training, by doing these things, because when you are sick, when you're injured, especially when you get later on in life, those are the things that reduce your quality of life, right? And so that's why we want to do what we can now while we have the opportunity to invest in our future. When you are sick, obviously, you're probably not working out. So, similarly, when you're injured, it's going to be really important to make sure that you are eating enough protein to preserve that muscle, right? To give your body what it needs so it's functioning properly. And again, well aware that when you're not feeling good, it's not like you're thinking of, oh, let me eat my meal prep. But sometimes we need to like force ourselves to eat what we know is going to be nourishing to our body. And so, yes, sometimes that means of the choices that you're making, are you making balanced choices or are we just reaching for comfort? Understood that you're probably not going to eat as much as you typically do, and it's not going to look like it typically does, but can we try? You know what I mean? Like, can we put that effort in? And that effort is really what we're looking for at the end of the day. And the more we understand about why that effort matters, the greater chance that we're going to give ourselves to continue to make said effort, right? So, similarly, if you are injured, if you are sick, you're probably not moving a whole lot, okay? So regardless if you're injured, if you're sick, if you're just more sedentary, just in general, okay? So whether or not it's because you're injured or sick, or maybe you're on vacation, Maybe you're just like, hey, you're chilling, you're living your best life on a beach. Love that for you. Or maybe you're just in a weird phase of life where like it's just really hard to work out. Like your kids are just sick after sick after sick. Maybe it's the beginning of the school year. You know how germs get kind of just thrown around and whatnot. Or maybe, a few weeks ago we dealt with an ice storm here in Nashville. And it was nuts, man. Like we had so much ice, like there was so much destruction, so many things were closed because number one, you couldn't get there, but also number two, so many places lost power. Because the ice was so heavy that it was taking down electrical poles, electrical wires, trees were falling everywhere that was taking these things down as well. And so for a long time, there were a lot of places that were closed. And so maybe you couldn't get to the gym, right? Or maybe, your gym didn't have power, like my gym didn't have power for a little bit. And so, all that to say, maybe you're just in a situation where you're just more sedentary than usual. Okay, well, if we are more sedentary, then we are not stimulating the muscle, right? And so, therefore, we're going to want to do what we can to eat enough protein, right? We can't work out, we can't stimulate that muscle. What can we do? All right. Eating enough protein is at least better than doing nothing, right? Eating enough protein is at least going to deposit into your overall protein stores in your muscle, right? Preserve them. And that's also something that I try to help my clients understand when we have foundational habits, right? So like we focus on our sleep, our hydration, our nutritional focus, and that can just be, I'm logging just for awareness. So that can be, hey, I'm trying to hit my protein targets. That can be, I'm not necessarily logging, but I'm making better choices. Whatever that nutritional focus is my point, right? And then you have your structured activity. So your lifts, your cardio, whatever that is. And so, hey, if you can't get to your workout for whatever valid reason, what else can you do, right? You're not just throwing in the towel throughout the whole entire day. You have other areas that you can focus on and that still makes you feel like you're doing something versus doing nothing. And if you can't work out, well, hey, let's make sure that you're at least nailing your nutrition, right? Let's make sure that we're nailing what we can nail, what's within our control, which is, are you making sure that you're eating enough calories? Are you making sure you're eating enough protein? These things, right? Making balanced choices, practicing restraint. So if you're more sedentary, if you're resting more, making sure that you're having that protein is going to be extremely important to you. And then the last topic, or the last reason I will say is if you are really active, okay, if you are really active, maybe you're an endurance athlete, maybe you are somebody who, does a lot of races, triathlons, things of that nature. There is a lot of muscle breakdown happening when you are super active, okay? When you are training for these things and also the actual event in and of itself, all right? So it's going to be really important to make sure that you are replenishing again that resource that your body is relying on. I have worked with over the last year. There are two clients that come to mind. One client, she regularly does a few triathlons. Some are sprints, some are Olympic, style or distances. But she has, think about like an on season and an off season, right? Her off season is, fall, winter, but her on season, really starting to ramp up for the races that are, in like the May timeframe. We really want to make sure that we are ramping up her nutrition much earlier than that, right? Because her training is ramping up. So we need to make sure that her nutrition is ramping up to give her body fuel to get through that race period. That's not the time to diet. That is not the time to restrict calories. We are switching our focus to we are fueling our body, okay? Your body is going through an insane amount of stress when you are a triathlon athlete. And so we need to make sure that we are giving your body what it needs, because if we don't give it what it needs, that's when we see those injuries happen. That's when we see our times suffer because our body is not fueled properly, right? And so it's really important to make sure that we are giving your body enough protein when you are an endurance athlete or you're just really, really active. The same idea as to why we need enough protein when we're getting stronger and we're building muscle, it still applies here, okay? You might not necessarily be a endurance athlete, but maybe your goal is to build that muscle or get stronger. It's literally the same reason that we started with. You know what I mean? Uh Also, a second client that comes to mind is she hired me. We worked together individually nutritionally a couple of years ago to get her ready for her wedding. Okay. And then she reached back out to me about 6 months ago because she wanted some help with her nutrition because she was a ultra marathon runner. This girl is so cool. She just has so many things that she's doing. But love working with athletes because they are so focused. They're so dialed in, and like the focus is very much like, hey, we need to be make sure that we are fueling, right? And it's so fun to fuel for these longer races because like, hey, we need to make sure we're having enough carbs, and sometimes those carbs can be like Oreos, while you're running 100 miles. Yep, we need to make sure like Oreos is part of it, anyways, lots of fun. But she reached out to me, and it was really important. When we first worked together, we were focusing on toning up, weight loss, whatever you want to call it, just making her feel comfortable and confident for her wedding day. Like that's so important, right? You're going to have these pictures, and you just want to feel your best because it's such a big important day. But now we're working on a very different goal, but the focus of protein is still very much there for a different reason. Okay. We're not necessarily trying to eat that protein to control that hunger, right? In fact, right now we are eating way more calories than we ate when we worked together in the past. So hunger isn't an issue. But that protein is still just as important because she is running 20 miles, 50 miles, working up to that 100-mile goal. Okay. And there again is so much stress happening within her body that we want to make sure that we are doing what we can to make sure that she is recovering during her training period, but also she is recovering after these races. Okay. Like when you're running a 50-mile race during your training season, you're running that on like a Saturday or Sunday. Okay, well, you can't just take the rest of the week off the next week. You have to like stay on track, right? And so making sure that you are eating like an athlete would eat ensures, hey, I need to make sure that we are eating enough protein, right? And so all of that to say, um, I've said this a couple of times, but I can't reiterate this enough. So I just want to make sure like I'm very clear on this. All right. The standard of eating enough protein is the standard. And that's going to be different for every single person based on who you are, your age, your weight, your height, your goals, if you're working towards weight loss, if you're an athletic event athlete, things like this. But the importance is still the importance. And so we can roll our eyes, and our culture is definitely, I think, sometimes doing a disservice of just making a joke about like, oh, I had to, quit my job to make sure that I'm eating enough protein. And like these things are funny, obviously, don't get me wrong. However, it might not be easy, but that doesn't mean it's not just as important. You know what I mean? Like, listen, I don't make the rules when I tell a client how much protein they need to eat. They told me what they're working on. And so, therefore, this is how much protein you need to eat in relation to other things to get there. You know what I mean? So, like, we need to continue to find ways to get there, right? We need to continue to find ways to rise to the standard. And it might not be easy to do, but that doesn't mean it's not as important. So, I'm hoping that some of these reasons, if you will, are maybe going to resonate with you a little bit to understand like it's not necessarily eating protein for an arbitrary reason as much as there's a lot of reasons as why we need to make sure that we're eating enough protein, and the recommended dietary guidelines as to how much you need to be eating are not enough. Those guidelines are basically just to sustain human life. If you were like laying in bed all day long. You know what I mean? That's not taking into consideration if you are dealing with any health issues, if you are dealing with any long term injuries, if you are trying to build muscle, if you are insert context here, which is, why things in the health and the fitness world are very much driven by context. So it's not necessarily saying, "Hey, I need to make sure I'm eating enough protein in order to be healthy." Well, why do you care? What part of eating protein is going to make you healthier? Please enlighten me. You know what I mean? And so some of these reasons would be reasons as to why, hey, if you don't care about eating enough protein, but you are really trying to get over the flu that you had, hey, maybe that gives you a little bit more of like a pep in your step, a boost in your intention to continue to try, right? And again, if you are not eating enough, your body will take from where it needs to take. period, it will. And so if we are not doing what we can to replenish what we know our body is going to use, then we can't be surprised when we struggle to maintain our muscle. We can't be surprised when we continue to lose muscle, even more so when we are aging, right? Um, and so the next time you roll your eyes at how much protein somebody tells you need to eat, and hopefully that somebody has education and experience to give you that accurate information. um, but the next time you roll your eyes, just think of some of these examples, okay? The more that we can understand why something is important, the better we are going to be able to show up and buy in, because it's not just like an arbitrary reason. I can't tell you how many times I have told somebody, wanting to lose weight is not a deep enough goal. It is not a deep enough goal to hold you in the fire when you don't feel like showing up, when you don't feel like eating enough protein, when you don't feel like going for a walk, when you don't feel like going to bed at a decent time. You know what I mean? Like, we need more deep reasons as to why our goals matter to us. Similarly speaking, we need deeper reasons as to why it's important for us to eat enough protein. Okay. So I hope this was a helpful resource for you as usual. But yeah, I mean, if there's anything that I said on here that you want to, kind of deconstruct and talk about further, or you have questions, or anything like that, there is a form in the caption of every single one of these episodes. I would love to hear from you. Let's keep this conversation going. Until next time, friends, make sure you are eating that protein.